Good morning. I know it's still morning. My name is Michael Savoy, President of the California Board of Accountancy, and I'd like to call this meeting to order. First order of business, I'd like to take a roll call starting to my left.
George Camelot. Mark Silverman.
Alicia Berha.
Carola Nicholson.
Jose Campos.
Luz Molina Lopez.
Dan Jacobson.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Kathleen Wright.
Sunny Youngson Park.
Sochi Leon.
Deirdre Robinson.
And Michael Savoy. We obviously have a quorum. Thank you. I'm going to read some opening remarks, then I'm going to flip the agenda around a little bit for convenience. The CBA's mission is to protect consumers by ensuring only qualified licensees practice public accountancy in accordance with established professional standards. This mission is derived from the statutory requirement that protection of the public shall be the highest priority for the California Board of Accountancy in exercising its licensing, regulatory, and disciplinary functions. Whenever the protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, the protection of the public shall be paramount. You may notice that our board members are referencing tablets during today's meeting. The tablets show that the board members can more easily access meeting materials and are not being used to discuss, deliberate, or take action in any item within the board's jurisdiction. I'd like to go to agenda item 1I, I believe. We have representation today from the Department of Consumer Affairs. Mr. Petit, come on up.
Hello, hello. Can you hear me okay? Wonderful, thank you. Happy New Year, everybody. It's good to see you all again. This is my second opportunity here to address the board and provide some updates from the Department of Consumer Affairs. So with that, wanted to let you know of a few upcoming meetings that we're going to be having with the department. The first of which is going to be the upcoming directors meeting on January 29th. The department will hold its quarterly meeting with board executive officers, bureau chiefs, and board presidents. As a reminder, these quarterly meetings are an opportunity to ensure that the director is available to you to hear important issues facing the department and its boards and bureaus. At this upcoming meeting, we're going to be highlighting some of our key items from our strategic plan and the related action items in order to achieve those department goals, some of which we'll be highlighting for 2018. Also wanted to give an update on the department's Future Leadership Development Program. The department's Future Leadership Development Program and its inaugural cohort continue to make tremendous strides. The FLD mentees, in addition to being paired with a mentor, are participating in special leadership development exercises, working on special projects that could positively impact DCA, developing new working relationships, and meeting with several executives who are sharing career advice. The FLD mentees will be meeting with Secretary Alexis Podesta from the California Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency in late January, and Appointments Secretary Mona Pascal in late February. We encourage board staff, board members, FLD to reach out for you for any sort of participation. We highly recommend it. In the past, we've had a board panel that's discussed how they've gotten to where they are with the FLD mentees, and we think it's a fantastic program that DCA offers. Also wanted to provide an update on board member orientation training. I think we had about 4 of us at the last board member orientation training. Really appreciated you all being there. That was my first opportunity to do our board member orientation training. Thought it went very well. As always, we look forward to improving upon that. With that being said, we've established our dates for 2018. Just in case there are any board members who might be required to take it here. Just as a reminder, board member orientation training is required within the first year of appointment or reappointment to the board. I'm going to run through some dates for the 2018 year, but we'll also be emailing those over to Patty, so don't worry if you don't quite write them down in time. March 21st will be our first quarterly BMOT training. We're also going to have a follow-up on June 6th. September 18th for the fall, and December 5th for the winter. So if there's any board members who need to take that training, we look forward to seeing you there, and please do not hesitate to reach out to myself, Ms. Karen Nelson, who's in the back here, our Assistant Deputy Director, or any members of our solid team if you need any assistance with registering or have any questions about the board member orientation training. Last note, I'm excited to announce we're going to have an Executive Officer Brown Bag coming up in February. This is conducted by Solid, and it's a series of gatherings with board executive officers, bureau chiefs, and other DCA executives. This is a structured social gathering, if you will. It's intended to provide a forum for transferring knowledge, building trust, and establishing networking relationships. As you're aware, we have a wide variety of boards and bureaus that cover a number of professions here in California. We have a lot of fantastic executive officers. You're certainly included. Getting those individuals together to share their knowledge, what's working at other boards, we think is a really important piece of improving the consumer protection through the department. So we look forward to that. That's going to be on Wednesday, February 28th. Time to be announced, and we'll be sending that information your way once we have that locked in. As always, if the department can be of service to the board, please let us know. And again, thank you for your diligent work and your valued partnership, and good luck with the rest of the board meeting here today.
Thank you so much for your being here.
Thanks. You for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Chris, just
Yeah,
for
of course,
clarification,
yeah.
Even if we're not participants, are we invited as audience members to any of these things, or should we be participants?
So are you talking about the executive officer brown bag?
All of them, yes.
All of them. So executive officer brown bag, that's an executive officer centric meeting. As you know, there's kind of items that the executive officers work on across all board members. So I mean, I think that's across all boards, excuse me. So it's catered kind of more specifically to that. The director's quarterly meeting, it's a balance, right? This is an executive officer, bureau chief meeting. We do reserve one of these meetings to encourage board presidents to come. That's not meant to be exclusionary in any way to other board members. We do have to do this balance of making sure that we have the right voices in the room, and also not having such a large population that we're unable to kind of have a efficient conversation. But that being said, through the executive officer, through your board president, I feel like there's always engagement from the board in that way. And then, as always, and this goes for whether it's a formal meeting or not, our office is here to engage with each and every board member. If you have questions that you feel like you want answered, whether it's at a board meeting, upcoming committee meeting, or just something you want to pick up the phone and ask me, I'm always here for that.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right.
We're going to cover items 1A and 1B, and then we're going to break for lunch. So just let you know in case you're getting a little hungry. Okay, item 1A is my report. Okay. The Leadership Roundtable meeting was yesterday, January 17th, right here in the CBA office. The meeting provided the new leadership with an opportunity to meet with the Executive Officer, Patty Bowers, and her executive team. During the meeting, we reviewed planned topics for 2018. Staff also provided an overview of their project list for 2018. And this project list for the coming year is quite full, with operational improvements, information technology upgrades, outreach, and many other items to further assist the CBA in meeting its consumer protection mandate. I thought the meeting was very successful, and some of the outcomes from this leadership identified some items such as developing the Sunset Review Report for issuance in late 2018, further exploring the issue of legalized marijuana and what the CBA's role is in this. This will include researching what other states have done in this area and working with Naspa on a national level, particularly in dealing with the federal government, if we possibly can. We all know this is an interesting issue. Last but not least, exploring an interim solution to accepting credit card payments. This will be explored prior to the implementation of a larger business modernization project, which will include transitioning from its current database and more significant automation. I look forward to working with both George and Mark this year as the incoming new leadership. Item 1B. This morning, we held an orientation for leadership from all CBA committees. The meeting provided an opportunity for me to relay my expectations for the role of the committee chairs and vice chairs. Ileana provided a thorough overview of how to conduct meetings in accordance with the Bagley-Keene Open Meetings Act, including such topics as roll call, the importance of establishing a quorum, conducting a vote, as well as other issues that often arise during meetings. Ms. Bowers provided an overview of CBA staff roles and responsibilities to support CBA committees and the CBA. There was great questions being asked during the meeting, and I believe it was a great learning opportunity for all those that attended. I'd like to thank Ileana, CBA's legal counsel, for assisting and facilitating this meeting. I'd also like to thank Mark for attending yesterday's meeting. I appreciate that. At this point, I'd like to break for lunch and have everybody back here at 1:30. It's 1:30. I'd like to call the meeting to order of the California Board of Accountancy. For the members up here, the audience was having some issues hearing us this morning, so please pull the microphone a little closer when it's your turn to speak, if you don't mind. Let's continue with Agenda Item 1, Letter C. Ms. Bowers.
Thank you, President Savoy. The purpose of this agenda item is to provide the CBA the opportunity to discuss a proposed amendment to the statutory language in Business and Professions Code 5058.2. The proposed amendment would allow inactive CPAs serving as current members of the California State Legislature or the United States Congress an exemption from placing the term inactive after their CPA designation. As members may recall, this topic has been brought before the CBA in the form of a few different proposals related to continuing education. Most recently, at the September 2017 meeting, members were asked to consider participation in legislative or congressional hearings as satisfying the CBA's continuing education requirements. The CBA elected not to move forward with that proposal. Recently, Senate Business and Professions Committee staff contacted me and requested that the topic be brought back before the CBA to explore a legislative solution to address the concerns previously raised by CPAs who are current members of the legislature and Congress. Senate BMP staff have expressed a willingness to work with the CBA in pursuing the solution via an omnibus bill or, if necessary, securing an author. Currently, licensees in an inactive status may use the CPA title. However, it must be followed by the term inactive immediately after that designation. In the attachment, staff have prepared proposed legislative language allowing an exemption to current members of the legislature and Congress who renew their license in an inactive status from having to place the term inactive after their CPA designation. The proposed language does clarify that the member may not engage in the practice of public accountancy while their license is inactive. This proposal may be viewed as a compromise from the previous proposals as it does not relate to the CBA's continuing education requirements. Given the fact that the Senate BMP committee will likely move forward with a legislative solution if no action is taken by the CBA, staff recommend that the CBA approve the language in the attachment to amend Business and Professions Committee's Business and Professions Code section 5058.2 and directs staff to seek inclusion in a 2018 omnibus bill, or, if necessary, to seek an author to carry the legislative bill. I would like to now turn it back over to President Savoy, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
I'd like to entertain a motion.
So moved.
So you move to approve.
I move to approve the action, the CBA's, I move to approve the proposed legislative language to amend BPC 5058-2 and direct staff to include, to seek inclusion into the 2018 omnibus bill.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. We have a first, we have a second. Is there a discussion amongst the board? Kathleen first.
Yes, thank you. I was confused with respect to how this would interrelate with preparation of tax returns and with Circular 230, which allows a CPA, as designated, to practice before the IRS, and yet this category of CPA without the inactive qualifier behind their name would in fact not have any continuing education requirement. So in that context, then they would be, I presume, able to do tax returns, represent taxpayers before the IRS without having any CE, and we just had a huge tax bill and so forth and so on. I was confused by that. I didn't know how this would interact with the tax process.
Well, I mean, clearly it talks about that it would not exempt them, it would not allow them to be engaged in the practice of public accountancy as defined in section 5051. We probably would have to look at that section to get an answer to your question regarding taxes. Clearly, it's defined enough from an accounting perspective that they can't engage in public
That's the gist of the
accounting
question.
work. So we need to take a look at that, if you could, to see.
Is this just for electeds, though? This is just for electeds? Is this exemption?
Well, yeah, I think it is that for
Right.
that.
Right.
But what Kathleen is saying is, could they then prepare tax returns? Because it's not being covered under what we're talking about.
No, they
So,
would not be able to do any tax return or any representation as a CPA that would be considered the practice of public accountancy, because they still do hold the license. And so because it was in an inactive status, it would prohibit them from those services as well.
Okay, but, okay, fair enough. But how would the IRS know that? Because if they sign the return, they would be signing the return as a CPA.
I mean, that was, if you remember the dialogue, you remember the
Yeah,
conference
I
call.
remember the dialogue,
And the
yeah.
conference calls, et cetera. Their intent was not to do this kind of work at all.
Correct.
Their intent was to have better standing amongst the legislators that they work with.
Right.
By having that removed as designation. Neither of them, or anybody in the future, unless I know of, had any intent of doing the work that CPAs do.
Agreed.
So, I mean, I think this clearly lays it out. So I'm not sure,
5051 is the,
Yeah, and I'm actually,
yeah, so, let me, when I get it, let me look at.
she's looking at it right now.
Yeah, okay, okay.
Okay. 5051 has F parts, subdivisions F through I, specifically G,
Yeah, I see it.
right, is prepares or signs as a tax preparer, tax returns for clients. That's included in the practice of public accountancy. However, if you look in the two paragraphs below, the final two paragraphs of 5051, the second, or the last, the first of the two last paragraphs, that sounds silly, but the activities set forth in subdivisions F through I, which includes G, are public accountancy only when performed by a CPA or a public accountant as defined in this chapter. However, in the following paragraph, it says, a person is not engaged in the practice of public accountancy if the only services he or she engages in are those defined by F to I, inclusive, and he or she does not hold himself or herself out, solicit, or advertise for clients using the CPA or a public accountant designation. I mean, the paragraph continues, but I feel like maybe this could be wordsmithed a little bit more to make it more reflective of the language in 5051, if that would, make anybody else feel better. But it seems to me if the only thing they're doing is preparing taxes for people, it's not included in public accountancy, and therefore I could do it.
And therefore what?
I could do it and not be violating the law because I'm not an accountant, but I could do somebody's taxes if that's the only thing I'm doing. So-
If you are a CPA, yeah, if you are a CPA, if you are not, I don't want to get into this, it's a little irrelevant. If you are not a CPA, you would have to be a licensed preparer, but that's a side.
That's a different
side
story,
issue.
but
Yes.
just for the sake of how this currently reads.
So I think I agree with you that the term public accountancy does not include tax preparation.
Right, if the only thing you're doing is preparing taxes and you're not advertising yourself as a CPA. So if
Which-
they're not advertising themselves as a CPA and they're doing taxes under federal law, I think that's fine. I don't think it contradicts 5058.2 as this proposed language. I think they're okay.
But my concern is just that they would be doing tax returns without having a continuing education requirement.
But if they do it, they'd be
But they're-
lying, and they'd be
Yes,
doing something that they're not
Wouldn't be
allowed to do.
They're
So
not
that's-
trying, they're not trying to do tax preparation, they just want to have that designation, to use that expertise as they're drafting legislation in their respective houses.
Right, that's their intent, and I guess my second question, which is broader and probably more relevant for this group, is this serving the best interest of the public to put them on notice of the status of the person's license and what their qualifications are?
Well, that was kind of the balancing that we were doing and even
Right.
having this conversation, because the concern that we as a body was expressing is how the public perceives people who are inactive, and making sure that the public knows that this professional is inactive. And we are weighing that against the perception that sort of people have of seeing the words inactive when it comes to elected officials, particularly who are serving in the California legislature and the Congress, where they are trying to use their expertise to help bolster their the credibility of the work that they're doing, but feeling as though that inactive terminology is undermining that credibility. So it was all just a weighing of, factors here. Just, I think we're being asked at this point to make a judgment call and, as to, what the danger is to the public by allowing this change, if there is any, and then making a decision
I want to
about
hear
it.
from Mr. Jacobson first.
Thank you. I often deal with they call them neutrals, but basically retired judges. And we call them judge, and we say your honor, and in their curriculum vitae and in their on their cards, it'll say Judge Smith, and then in parentheses it says RET, period, in parentheses. If there's a lawyer who's inactive, he's not a lawyer. And if there's an MD who's if I went to the doctor the other day because I had allergies, and I assumed that the person who examined me, whose last name was MD, was in fact a doctor currently eligible to practice medicine. And if he wasn't, then I should be told that. And so I think that this almost borders on fraud to say that someone who is ineligible to practice in the accountancy profession is not inactive. I understand that perhaps they want to to say, well, I should be, my expertise on this should be taken seriously, well then, back it up with some seriousness and say, you know, I used to work at this. I used to be a partner at this accountancy firm, or I am a partner at this accountancy. I guess you aren't if you, whatever. I think that this is just not a good idea, no matter how much they want it. I have a suspicion, and it's only a suspicion, that maybe because you're only allowed to put on the ballot 3 words to describe what you do, maybe they don't want to have to put the word inactive.
Kathleen?
So,
The other comment that we discussed when this came up last was the fact that sure, these people are busy, and so are all of us that serve on this board, and the comparison then was to partners in the big firms, and they're busy, and so somehow they managed to get the 80 hours. I mean, why can't, if they want inactive off of their license, why don't they just get the continuing education?
Jose?
So all of these points were, I think, debated during each of the prior things, and hence the reason we didn't take our own action from just modifying our regulations, right? So that's been asked and answered. The dilemma was, we did talk about the legal profession and that they didn't have to do this, but there was a they were exempt from CE requirements, I guess, in their case, but that was legislatively taken, you know, in terms of their process. And we at the time indicated, well, if there's a legislative solution to this, we would be supportive of it. That's what's coming back here. We're not unilaterally changing regs. We are proposing that, hey, based on all of this dialogue, we'd be comfortable with this. And if they get an author, and if they get this through the legislature, we'd be supportive of it. And so I probably don't feel as strongly about some of the arguments being made, but we've had these debates, and I certainly wasn't a supporter of the reg changes, but I am a supporter of this idea, assuming that they can get the appropriate legislative support. They would still be forced, and I think gets back to the ethics and all the other things you have to do here. You have to fill out your renewal, you have to indicate you're inactive, and you're being exempted from indicating inactive just during the tenure of being an elected.
Yeah, we're not waiving CPE requirements. We're not waiving that to enable them to practice the way we do. So there's distinctive difference in what is being proposed.
Right.
But that's sort of the challenge, in making the comparison to the law, which is what they kept going back to. We're not really being asked to make this consistent with what happens with lawyers. We're being asked merely to address this moniker and not really address why there is an exemption and what's the purpose of having the category of inactive versus the category of active. As Mr. Jacobson stated, the point of having, retired or inactive, or of an attorney not being able to call, himself or herself Esquire, is so that the public knows what their designation is. This proposal is for the purpose of the public having a perception of the person that's using the moniker or not using the moniker. And so they're proposing a change to the moniker without addressing the rationale behind why the moniker was originally required. We've had pretty extensive conversation about this. We've had a number of different recommendations for how to address this, and the policy behind having these different categories. And my concern about this is it completely ignores what the concerns we very clearly expressed about changing the status. It just ignores all of that and merely addresses the moniker. And I'm concerned about about this board's expressed concerns not even being addressed. I would have been more comfortable with a bill that proposed changing the CPE requirements so that they encapsulated more of the responsibilities that these legislators engage in so that they fall under a professional category. We spend a lot, we will spend some time talking about how to change the rules on continuing education requirements for professionals who practice. Why should this category of individual be subjected to anything different? So that's the kind of
Yeah,
the concern.
So just, I wanted to make sure it's clear. When contacted by the Business and Professions Committee, this was not their proposal. What their ask of the Board of Accountancy was to put it back on the agenda and come up with a solution that would address the concerns that were raised by the individuals who presented the CE exemption proposals before, and try to come up with something that, if put in legislation, the board could support. And the purpose of that ask was in an effort not have the legislature put something forward that the board might have to oppose. So this actually was a staff created, so I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Any further comments?
So then could we propose that staff look at, I know we looked at it at a previous board meeting, and I apologize, I didn't go back and look at what we discussed in the past, but could we propose that staff look at a legislation that would expand the definition of continuing education to include, legislative activities that would then qualify to allow a CPA to continue to be considered a CPA, and allow those that work. As I'm now saying it, unfortunately, I recognize it opens up a whole other.
Yeah, that, if you wish, that could be a topic of a further agenda. Right now, we have a first and second on the table. I want to get through discussions at this level. I want to ask if the public has any comments regarding this issue. Seeing none, please call for a vote.
Okay, Alicia Burhow.
Yes.
Jose Campos.
Yes.
George Familet.
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Lines.
No.
Dan Jacobson.
No.
Soshi Leon. Luz Molina Lopez.
No.
Corolla Nicholson.
Yes.
Sunny Young Sun Park.
Yes?
Deirdre Robinson.
No.
Michael Savoy.
Yes.
Mark Silverman.
Yes.
And Kathleen Wright.
No.
Did Sochi abstain, or is she not here?
She's not.
Okay, so she's an exception.
What do you have?
What is the final count on that?
I need an accountant.
Motion passes
What was the final count?
7-5.
7-5.
Thank you very much for the robust discussion. Let's move on to item letter D. Mr. Bone.
Thank you, Mr. President. The purpose of this agenda item is to provide the CBA members the opportunity to discuss the ongoing role of the Mobility Stakeholder Group, or MSG. At the September 2017 meeting, the MSG discussed the value of providing ongoing oversight of the CBA's mobility program, including the possible role for the MSG. During that discussion, the MSG offered the CBA two potential options. First, continue the MSG for a finite period of time, and then disperse the MSG's functions and responsibilities into other CBA advisory committees. Second, amend the MSG's statutory authority to broaden the scope of the MSG's role or enact other changes as approved by the by the CBA. Ultimately, the MSG recommended that its functions and responsibilities continue, but in a framework and structure to be determined later by the CBA. The CBA approved this recommendation. For your consideration, on pages 3 and 4 of the agenda item, it discusses the different aspects of the MSG's functions and structure, including the continued monitoring of other states' enforcement programs, the authority to recommend statutory or regulatory changes, the membership and structure of the MSG, and whether updates to the CBA statutes and regulations are necessary to implement any changes approved by the CBA. In addition, the CBA may wish to consider the MSG's meeting frequency and reporting requirements, or whether to appoint a new advisory committee to carry out certain roles specified by the CBA. Having said all this, staff offer the CBA members the following recommendations. First, maintain the current authority and responsibility of the MSG to help ensure consumer protection and direct it to make recommendations to the CBA regarding the MSG's activities that would effectively monitor the CBA's mobility program. Second, rather than appoint a new committee, maintain the current structure of the MSG and continue the CBA president's authority to make appointments. Third, require the MSG to meet no less frequently than twice a year. And fourth, if appropriate, direct CBA staff to draft legislation to update Business and Professions Code Section 5096.21E to grant the MSG authority similar to the CBA's other existing advisory committees. Mr. President, that concludes my remarks. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. Do we have a motion?
Move to adopt the recommendations from staff. Second.
So we have a first and second. Any discussion?
One topic that got discussed in this context before was taking those responsibilities, not necessarily adding a new committee, but seeing what part might fit within legislative or CPC, the existing statutory committees. And how did staff think about that idea, or is that kind of encompassed in that first bullet point of how this might eventually kind of get recommended?
Yeah, I believe, Mr. Campos, that item was discussed at the staff level but determined through this recommendation that maintaining the existing structure and authority of the MSG was appropriated, which is why it's then recommended to the CBA for consideration.
Until we have a more definitive next step then, so keep the structure as we have it, give a few extra charge here that we're asking the MSG to also give us recommendations in these areas, because I know that was a bit of a agenda topic before. So is that the essence?
Yes.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Any public comment? Ms. Reed?
Kathleen Wright,
Yes?
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson,
Yes.
Carola Nicholson,
Yes.
Sunny Youngsun Park,
Yes?
Melina Lopez,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
George Pamela,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
and Alicia Burhout.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
In the context of that approved item, it'd be helpful to maybe have a communication to the existing MSG committee members, just maybe on what ideas leadership and staff have in terms of when the next meetings of that committee would be, since they're currently not planned or calendared and be good for people
Sure.
to plan appropriately.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the next item, which is a written report anyway, it lays out who those members were from the last committee. We can think about staying or changing or replacing any of those members as the need arises. In particular, I see this where once mobility actually passed, there was a member that just didn't come anymore.
Well,
So,
there's a stipulated membership to it right now that I think we have to live under, right, until something modifies. But for now, the real request was just communicate as to when we might meet again and start gauging kind of availability and what have you.
okay. Next item is a written report only. Next item, Mr. Bone, you're back.
Nice to see you again, Mr.
Long
President.
time.
This item, 1F, is intended to provide an overview of the CBA's upcoming sunset review process. The term sunset is used because the statutory authority of the Department of Consumer Affairs boards and bureaus, including the CBA, contain a deadline in statute for the legislature to reauthorize that board or bureau. If a bill is not enacted to extend the authority of that board or bureau, its authority would lapse or sunset. The CBA's current sunset date is January 1, 2020. Therefore, the CBA is scheduled for its next sunset review in 2019. Each year, the Assembly and Senate Business and Professions Committee meet as a joint legislative committee on sunset review. Approximately 2 years before the sunset date of a particular board or bureau, the Joint Committee will provide to that board or bureau a series of questions and requests for data and other information related to its licensing, enforcement, and related functions. Once received by a board or bureau, this document leads to the creation of the Sunset Review Report, which is typically due to the legislature a little more than a year before their sunset date. The CBA has not yet received this series of questions, but we have included as an attachment to this item a sample of the types of questions asked of DCA boards and bureaus who submitted a report last year. Following the board or bureau's submission of its Sunset Review Report, a hearing of the Joint Committee would be held so that the committee members may hear from the CBA President and Executive Officer and ask questions of them. Following that hearing, legislative staff could be expected to issue their recommendations, including whether the CBA's sunset date should be extended and if any of the CBA's functions should be revised. As indicated in the agenda item, staff anticipate bringing updates on this process and topic to the March, May, and July 2018 CBA meetings, with a possible approval of the CBA's Sunset Review Report to occur in the September 2018 CBA meeting. That concludes my presentation. I'll turn it back to the President.
Thank you. There's no action required on this?
Correct.
Is there any discussion at all? Thank you very much. Moving on to the next item, the letter will be G, discussion of possible action to seek an upgrade to the executive officer classification. Ms. Pierce.
Thank you. The purpose of this agenda item is to discuss an upgrade for the California Board of Accountancy's executive officer classification. During the November 2017 CBA meeting, the CBA discussed the EO's annual performance evaluation and at the conclusion provided direction to seek a salary increase. The current executive officer was appointed at the maximum salary in the classification level in 2008. In order to accommodate a salary increase, an upgrade to the classification level from level H to level G is necessary. Following the November meeting, staff consulted with the Department of Consumer Affairs regarding the CBA's direction. DCA determined that an item would need to be included on a future agenda specifically requesting an upgrade to the classification. Further, to justify the requested upgrade, DCA suggested that detailed information should be provided regarding what has changed and how the CBA organization has grown over the prior years. This information is identified on page 1 and 2 of the agenda item. If the CBA approves this upgrade, a formal request must be sent to DCA's Office of Human Resources and Office of Board and Bureau Services, who will facilitate the request, which must be approved by the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, the Governor's Office, and the California Department of Human Resources. If approved, the CBA will then determine the EO's salary within the new pay range of the classification level. Based on the feedback provided at the annual EO performance evaluation that occurred in November, it is recommended that the CBA direct staff to seek an upgrade to the EO classification to level G. And I will turn it back over to the President, and I'm happy to answer any questions that members may have.
Is there any questions, comments, discussions?
I move to adopt the recommendation noted on page 3 of the memo.
Second. Third.
We'll get to the vote in a second. Any other discussion? Public comment? Ms. Reed?
All right. Alicia Burhow.
Yes.
Jose Campos.
Yes.
George Pamela.
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
Dan Jacobson.
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez.
Yes.
Carola Nicholson.
Yes.
Sunny Youngsun Park.
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson.
Yes.
Michael Savoy.
Yeah.
Mark Silverman.
Yes.
And Kathleen Wright.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you. Next item. H. Development since the 2015 United States Supreme Court decision in North Carolina State Board versus the dental examiners. Liliana?
I have no updates for this meeting,
Oh, thank you so much.
partly because I've been sick.
All right.
So, if there's an update, I can't tell you about it right now.
All right, let's go on to item 2, report of the
But I don't think there has been this meeting.
Vice President.
President. This item is to recommend that Kevin Harper, CPA, be reappointed as Vice Chair to the Peer Review Oversight Committee. The Peer Review Oversight Committee assists the CBA in an advisory capacity in its oversight of the peer review program. I have conferred with the CBA Executive Officer to verify that Mr. Harper has met the requirements for license renewal and has demonstrated the skills and knowledge to serve in a leadership capacity on the Peer Review Oversight Committee. I recommend that Kevin Harper be reappointed as Vice Chair of the Peer Review Oversight Committee effective until December 31st, 2018.
Is that a duly formed motion?
President, ask for a motion.
Okay, motion, please.
I move that we reappoint Kevin.
Second.
Any discussion? Public comment? Call for a vote.
Kathleen Wright,
Yes.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Deidre Robinson,
Yes.
Sunny Youngsun Park,
Yes.
Carola Nicholson,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
George Familet,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
and Alicia Burhow.
Yes.
Motion passes. Any further? Next.
Nope, that concludes
Your report.
report.
Thank you. Item 3, Secretary Treasurer, Mr. Silverman.
Thank you, President Savoy. I just have a brief financial report on the governor's budget. The CBA's current fiscal year budget has received an augmentation primarily to accommodate increased personnel costs and is now set at $13,935,000. The fiscal year 2018-19 proposed budget is $14 million as released in the governor's budget on January 10th of this year. This is an increase of approximately 0.5% and reflects a slight increase in personnel costs. In May, the governor will again review the proposed budget and make any changes via line item veto in order to arrive at a final figure. The legislature must then pass the budget bill by June 15th, giving the governor 12 days to either sign it or return it to the legislature. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Under item 3, letter B, the discussion of possible action to initiate a rulemaking to amend Title 16 regarding fees. Deanna.
Thank you. The purpose of this agenda item is to provide the California Board of Accountancy with proposed regulatory language which would increase the initial license and license renewal fees to ensure the accountancy fund is maintained at a sufficient level. At the November 2017 meeting, the CBA discussed its current and future accountancy fund level and corresponding months in reserve. During that meeting, it was discussed that the accountancy fund level will decrease in future years as the CBA is working with a structurally imbalanced budget. Specifically, although the CBA is spending within its legislatively established budget, the revenues received are not sufficient enough to cover expenditures. To ensure the CBA has sufficient resources for unanticipated enforcement matters and litigation, to transition from its current database, and to be responsive to the legislature who provided guidance that the CBA maintain its fund level equivalent to 24 months in reserve, the CBA directed staff to prepare regulatory language reflecting an increase of the initial license and license renewal fee to $250. As part of the rulemaking process, a state agency must include any materials it relied upon in determining the need for and/or supporting the requested regulatory language. One of the items the CBA will be including in its rulemaking package and that was requested during the November CBA meeting is an analysis of the actual cost the CBA incurs to process license renewal applications and fees. This document is under development and will be provided at the public hearing for CBA reference. Attachment 3 of your agenda item is proposed regulatory language for CBA consideration and approval. Based on direction from the legislature to ensure sufficient resources to fund unanticipated enforcement or litigation matters and enable the CBA to transition to a new database, staff recommend the CBA make a motion to approve the proposed regulatory text in CBA Regulation Section 70, direct staff to submit the text to the Director of DCA and the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency for review, and if no adverse comments are received, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, make any non-substantive changes to the package, and set the matter for hearing. At this time, I will turn it over to the president, and I would be happy to answer any questions that members may have.
Can I get a motion?
I move that the CBA approve the proposed regulatory language to increase the initial license and license renewal fees and direct staff to initiate the rulemaking process.
Thank you. Thank you. Any discussion? Ms. Wright?
Thank you. As I recollect, the last time this fee increase was proposed, it was denied by the Department of Finance. Am I correct in that statement?
Yes.
Were the issues that were raised by the Department of Finance addressed here? I don't know what they were. All I recall is that they were denied.
The primary issue the Department of Finance had is that we were waiting for general fund loan repayments, which we had received, so they wanted us to receive those back first before we initiated any kind of fee increase. And those were received back at the end of last fiscal year.
And why did that result in their denial of the increase in the fee? It would seem, if anything, that would support increasing the fee if we weren't going to get the money back. But we got the money back, and so then what? I mean, how do you rationalize that?
I think at that time, all the loans were being repaid back to the special fund agencies. And so I think at that point, the Department of Finance wanted to get the loans repaid and then have each of the agencies do another analysis on their fund condition to see where it stood, to project out, to see what their fund level would be within the existing fee structure. It's been a couple of years since that's occurred, so now we're going back through that process again. In discussing with the Department of Consumer Affairs, they were also on board with the fact that at some point in the future, well, 2 years ago when we were going through this initially and we were looking at our projections for our revenues in future years, they were on the same page in that in a future year we were likely going to have to increase fees because of our structural imbalance. So now that we're 2 years out from that Department of Finance ruling, other agencies within the Department of Consumer Affairs who were in the same boat as us, so to speak, have now also been moving forward with fee increases. So I think that there's just a different climate now that all the loans have been repaid and that we have those reserve funds and kind of looking where we're at going forward. I think, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go please.
I was just going to say, the other thing that was brought up at November, which makes us a little bit different from some of the other boards, was the comments received by the legislature in terms of what they were directing or suggesting, recommending, I'm not sure what the right word is, that our board particularly keep our months in reserve at, which is at the 24-month, which is at the higher end level, because of the volume and the type of enforcement that we are going to be undertaking, or could be necessary to undertake. So that may not be the similar direction that the legislature has given other boards. I think the other thing that comes into play is transitioning from our current database. I think 2 years ago when we were looking at the Breeze system, which was what was being implemented at that time, the costs were a lot different than they are now. We are going to be looking at a different, potentially Breeze, but potentially a different kind of IT solution for our business needs, and that was projected out on the financial here as being an impact to our reserve as well. So I think it's just a different picture today than it was 2 years ago.
I think you just answered my second question, but let me ask it anyway just to be sure. My second question is, in light of the fact that this is more than a doubling of the existing fee, how does this increase correlate with, as an example, the CPI index or with inflation increases, if at all? And if it's higher than what would otherwise have been necessary to correlate with, quote, inflation, then what are the additional and incremental expenditures that are necessary, that you perceive will be necessary in order to justify this level of an increase?
We went through this extensively at our last
did.
meeting.
Yeah.
We
did.
came up with the level of fees that we thought would be adequate based on the situation, the facts and circumstances. I don't think we need to rehash that. I mean, we did it already.
We did.
And we determined the amount. We just asked for some legislation and to put in writing, so to bring back to this meeting, so we can either say yay or nay. I don't want to go back around what we had
No.
done at a previous meeting.
That's fine. Then I'll be glad to withdraw the question. I guess my position is simply that I certainly don't object to a fee increase. What I find that I'm still a little unresolved about is more than a doubling of the fee.
Okay, thank you. Miss-
Yeah, this is all about just being, so I'm not crazy about a fee increase, this is all about being in compliance with the state of California. So this is why this fee increase is, going forward, and it's something we can revisit at a later time as well.
Yeah, and although you may perceive it as a doubling plus,
Yeah.
it was $200 for an awful long time.
Yes, yeah.
We had reduced it
Yes.
based on other things going on at the time. So it may be a double plus 10, the way you look at it, but it's just $50 above what it had been for a long time that I'm aware of.
So probably not everybody on the board has been on that journey, but
Yeah.
we provided that information, I think, at the last meeting. But the only supplement I will make to that discussion is, it was at $200 for a very long time without increases, if you will. The reductions that took it eventually down to the 120 were meant to be temporary.
Correct.
That they were, for a variety of reasons, they didn't become temporary, but they were meant to be temporary, and so this is trying, to get it back to something that's considered appropriate in the current environment.
Correct.
You had a comment?
So, yeah, I was going to ask, from trying to study this issue and being a new participant to this board, what are enforcement expenditures and why are they expected to increase?
The enforcement expenditures are the monies that we spend actually to kind of investigate and prosecute the various complaints that come through that end up in discipline. Why are they expected to increase? Maybe I'll have Ms. Bowers.
Over the last 3 years, we have done a lot of internal adjustments in our enforcement program. We have resolved a lot of backlog, and we have modified our internal procedures to more effectively handle enforcement matters. And so if we compare the last 3 years to prior years, I would say we're just doing a much better job in our enforcement program in protecting consumers, but that comes at a cost. As we increase staff resources, as we more efficiently get through our investigations and proceed into the disciplinary arena, those costs go up.
Understood, thank you.
I add one thing to what you just said, Patty. The number of licensees have increased significantly over that period of time, so the population has increased. The complexity's increased as well. Mobility brings a new realm to this in terms of dealing with out-of-state and in-state type of folks. So.
Thank you.
Any further comments at the board? Any public comments? Ms. Reed?
Alicia Burhow,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
George Familet,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson,
Yes.
Sunny Youngsun Park,
Yes?
Deirdre Robinson,
Yes.
Michael Savoy.
Yes.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
and Kathleen Wright.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you very much for the report, Ms. Pierce. Moving on to item 4, letter A, no report. Ms. Deanne Pierce again. Item B.
Thank you. Agenda item 4B is the proposed changes to the California Board of Accountancy Member Guidelines and Procedures Manual, or GMP Manual. The edits are identified by underline and strike through, and I'm just going to provide a brief overview of some of the substantive proposed changes. Under Section 1, California Board of Accountancy, on page 7, under the Vice President duties, we removed wording to clarify just that outreach duties are conducted by all CBA members. On pages 7 and 8, under Agenda, we've updated information on how CBA leadership works with staff to develop the agenda, and we removed outdated language regarding the display of enforcement matters on an agenda. On page 9, under Webcast, we updated the information to reflect that CBA meetings provide closed captioning on the webcast. On pages 12 and 13, we've provided updated information regarding the enforcement program. And under Section 2, CBA committees and task forces, on page 19, under the Peer Review Oversight Committee, we updated the purpose to reflect an additional role for the Peer Review Oversight Committee. And we made other just minor non-substantive changes just to improve overall clarity. Further, DCA Legal Counsel conducted a thorough review and provided suggestions on expanding the enforcement section of the GMP manual. And we're going to be working with her on those suggestions, and if changes are necessary, we're going to bring that back for member review and approval at a future meeting. Staff recommend that the CBA adopt the January 28 version of the CBA GMP manual, and at this time, I'll turn it over to the President, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Call for a motion.
I have a question first. I mean, it could lead to some minor changes that I think could be delegated as opposed to having to come back to the full board, or is there a sensitivity with that?
No, there wouldn't be.
Okay, I mean, obviously, if there's something significant, then, maybe in consultation with the president, we can assess whether or not it needs to come back. But that would be my motion. I mean, I would recommend adopting the changes made and proceed with any additional reviews and changes and really bring back only if significant matters warrant.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
If I could draw everyone's attention to page 14 of the new CBA Member Guideline and Procedures Manual. There's some disturbing language in the third paragraph down during this is all about default decisions. So this is not, in almost all cases, this is not going to matter because a default is axiomatically a default. But there's a restriction on what we can discuss.
That's accurate.
And there wasn't such a restriction in the previous in the previous iteration of the manual. So it says that CBA members may only ask procedural questions and must make their decision on the evidence available. That's fine. But that in the rare instance where there might be 10 years from now some sort of default decision that that we might think is that someone might be able to point out is not good and shouldn't be accepted. I think we should be able to point that out. And we've never, I don't think there's ever been a problem with being able to do that in the past. So I think that we should be able to discuss whatever we want to discuss and not only ask procedural questions.
What could have changed between the first iteration and this that would have led us to that conclusion?
I don't know that I would have phrased it in the way that it was phrased, but if you're concerned about whether it was a proper default in terms of were they properly served, did they get the notice of hearing, is that what you're talking about, or are you concerned about other things that might have gone awry?
I'm concerned.
Because if it's an improper default, I will catch it.
if they're properly served and that sort of thing, I think that's a procedural question
Right.
that is allowed by this language. But if, again, I don't think that anyone here is going to, I don't think this is gonna happen.
Right.
But if someone is defaulted for some silly reason that makes no sense, then I think a member should be able and members should be able to point out substantively that this default was based on something that makes no sense.
Let's hear from Don.
So, to your most recent point, and then I'll speak to why it was added in as well. The board has rejected defaults in the past and sent them back for either additional investigation or there was one recently where they got rejected because they wanted to make really, really sure the individual didn't want to file a notice of defense. We went back out, and he, in fact, when we spoke to him again, he did, in fact, file a notice of defense the second time around. And so the board can make those decisions during closed session to reject a default decision. So this doesn't preclude that. It's just you have to make whatever decision you're going to make on the record itself, the evidence, and and so you're limited to the procedural questions to be able to ask legal counsel. As to why it's added, it just wasn't there in the previous iteration. It wasn't that that restriction or those procedures didn't exist. We added it into this to create more information for members at that time. And if an individual wants to, and this is one of the suggestions that Ileana brought up to us, there's other information related to if an individual, after you've made your default decision, request to vacate or request to reconsider, and those have come before the board as well. So there are other mechanisms that a licensee or the board can avail itself related to a default.
And again, truly, if you have, sorry to interrupt, but if in reviewing the evidence packet that you receive with your defaults, if as a board member you look and you say, I do not want to vote on a default for this, you vote no. And you still can, because.
But I can't talk about it. I can't tell my fellow board members that, listen, the substance of this was that had something to do with carpentry. And not accounting, and I should be able to say that. So my only suggestion is to just take out the language that says CBA members may only ask procedural questions.
I would like to ask Ileana, because I may not be versed enough in this. I don't believe simply because I bring you a default, or the board brings you a default, the board has to act on it. They could reject it and withdraw the accusation as well.
Yes.
So if the board can talk about the actual information within the packet, because those are what are available. Their questions to counsel are limited to procedural questions. They're questions amongst themselves. It can be an open dialogue, as far as I understand it to be during closed session, as to whether or not the evidence supports it, or whether or not even the act itself was sufficient, in your opinion, to warrant the filing of an accusation. If the board feels otherwise, they could reject the default and direct Patty to withdraw the accusation.
And I appreciate that. I just don't think that that's what this says.
Well, I would have, I
so
agree,
wait-
I would have phrased it
So
differently.
let's go back
Yeah.
to the first comment she made, which says, I would not have phrased it exactly that way. Let's hear how she might have phrased it and see if we're on board and can move forward.
I think another way that we could phrase it, because I get what you're saying. It says they may only ask procedural questions and must make their decision based on the evidence available. When you make a decision that entails deliberation, so the board can deliberate on the evidence that's available, which is in the evidence packet. But in terms of, you can't ask anything else other, and that's why maybe this is not the correct, maybe this is not quite the right phrasing, but you could ask about procedural, but you can't, and the evidence in front of you, but you can't ask other things. Anything outside of the current record you can't discuss.
So
And I
let's-
think that's what this is
so
trying to say.
let's say that.
And so we just need to rephrase it, that's all.
Can we just add in the evidence that's on the record?
Yeah, and Dominic and I
Yeah.
are gonna work together on this, and we're gonna
Okay.
and we're gonna address a specific issue. I'll put a star next to it to make sure.
I would make a motion that we go along with Alicia's
Are
motion.
you asking us to
Jose's
modify our motion?
Yes, a modification. Thank you very much. I'd like to ask that the motion be modified to include what we just discussed.
And I'll modify myself.
Jose, will you be willing to do that?
I would be willing, and I think it seems like a non-substantive change that wouldn't have to come back to
Right,
the
right.
full board, so it's still in the spirit of the whole thing.
And you second that?
Yes.
Any further discussion, any public comment? Ms. Reed?
Okay, Kathleen Wright,
Yes?
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Michael Savoy.
Yes.
Deidre Robinson.
Yes.
Sunny Yenson Park,
Yes?
Carola Nicholson,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
George Familet,
Yes.
Jose Campos.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Just to
Item,
let you know, Mr. President, sometimes in law school, people will get upset with me because I read the footnotes.
I thank you for that. The devil's in the detail. Mr. Bone, item 4C.
Thank you, Mr. President. Some brief comments about our outreach and communications program. Last November, staff attended a student outreach event held on the campus of CSU Sacramento. Approximately 100 students attended this event, and many approached the CBA's table where they were provided information on the CBA's requirements for licensure. As indicated in my outreach and communications report in your packet, we're currently working to secure outreach opportunities for the remainder of this year. I've been in contact with the accounting department at CSU San Bernardino and have tentatively scheduled an event for Tuesday, February 27th. Kathy Johnson, the chair of Cal CPA, is on the faculty there at that school, and she's been very helpful in setting up some of the logistics for that event, and we look forward to partnering with Cal CPA on that. Looking further down the road, I'm also in discussions with program administrators at the University of California at San Diego about holding an event prior to the end of their academic year, possibly in the month of May. Another priority for staff will be to better leverage technology to expand the reach of our outreach program. For example, if the CBA were to create high-quality videos that describe the examination, education, and experience requirements for licensure, then we could share that valuable information more easily with those who may never be able to attend an in-person event. That concludes my remarks, Mr. President. I'll return to you.
Thank you. Quick comment?
Yes, thank you. Would the CBA have an interest, particularly since your audience for outreach is universities and students, in promoting and assisting with the development of the Student Center for the Public Trust, which is a subset of Naspa, and is great. What it does is it provides speakers who are experts in ethical training, it provides webinars, it provides case studies, it provides the opportunity for universities to plug into the professional community with respect to their development of their ethics curriculum. Further, NASPA currently has 40 universities that do have student chapters, that's the way it's referred, of the Center for Public Trust that have these resources. None of them are in California, none of the 40. So I think outreach, this would be a logical extension of outreach through your connections with universities, and I'd be glad to help you or work with you or whatever. I just think it'd be a great program.
So offline, work with Mr. Bone
Very
on how
good.
he can further develop that which you so
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
suggested. Thank you. Thank you so much. Item 5, no report for the EAC, no report for the QC. Item C, Mr. DeLizer for the peer review oversight.
Moral support. Thank you. I'll begin with my overview of our committee meeting December 8th here at Sacramento CBA office, and start with thanking the board for our new appointee, Ms. Tam, and although she's not here, our committee would like to express its thanks to Ms. Salazar for attending our meeting. She stuck it out through the entire meeting, and it was a long one. At our meeting, the members voted to approve the 2018 new meeting dates and reported various oversight activities that took place during the period between May 5th of 2017 and December 8th of 2017. We discussed the findings from the 2017 administrative site visit at the Cal CPA office. We reviewed and discussed the AICPA paper entitled Evolving Peer Review Administration to Enhance Audit Quality. And this new model provides a number of benchmarks for administering entities, and the committee in its future meetings is going to discuss how we integrate those benchmarks into our oversight activities with the Cal CPA. We further discussed implementing a California peer reviewer population monitoring framework, which Mr. Franzella will discuss in more detail in the next report. And we reviewed a draft California peer review program flowchart. We reviewed and approved updates to our committee procedures manual and discussed progress on the AICPA peer review integrated management application, or PRIMA as it's referred to. Our next meeting will be held next month, February 9th, here in Sacramento. And that concludes my report on our December 8th meeting.
Thank you. We have a second item of agenda regarding dates.
Yes.
Well, you already mentioned those, right? So,
Well, the future dates.
Our committee approved them. I believe the board is required
We need to take action to
I
either
move
adopt or not.
approval of the dates presented by the PROC.
Second.
Any further discussion? Any public comment? Please call for a vote.
Alicia Burhow.
Yes.
Jose Campos.
Yes.
George Famila.
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines. Dan Jacobson.
Yes.
Soshi Leon. Luz Molina Lopez.
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson.
Yes.
Sunny Young Sun Park.
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson.
Yes.
Michael Savoy.
Yes.
Mark Silverman.
Yes.
And Kathleen Wright.
Yes.
Okay, motion passed. Next item, the overview of the California Peer Review Program. Mr. Francella.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members. First, Mr. Brackens, who is with the AICPA and oversees the AICPA's peer review program, he was snowed in, so he is not here. Mr. DeLizer is here to assist, as well as Ms. McCrone from Cal CPA, who oversees the administering of AICPA's program in California. So as there are several new members on the CBA, and the next two items and the next two topics focus on peer review, this item is being provided as kind of just a quick educational overview of the California peer review program. And so mandatory peer review took effect in January 2010. And peer review specifically is the study of an accounting firm's accounting and auditing work by an unaffiliated CPA following professional standards. And the purpose of peer review is to promote quality in accounting and auditing services provided by accounting firms to ensure that the licensees are adhering to professional standards. And peer review in California is a condition of active status license renewal, and firms must undergo peer review if they performed what are considered accounting and auditing, or A&A services, during the preceding 3 years. And so in your materials, we've attachments 1 and 2 are the specific statutes and regulations that govern the peer review program, and primarily the specific information related to implementing mandatory peer review, and a lot of the administrative aspects are encapsulated in the regulations. And these spell out the licensees and which licensees need to undergo peer review, what the firm's responsibility and enrollment requirements are, their various reporting requirements, and then, so there's a licensee component, and then there's the peer review provider, CBA recognized peer review program provider requirements, and these are the minimum requirements providers must meet in order to be approved by the CBA to perform reviews in California. And presently, the CBA only recognizes the AICPA, or the American Institute of CPAs, as an approved peer review program provider. And the AICPA uses administering entities to administer its programs, with Cal CPA acting as the administering entity in California. And in attachment 3 to your materials, sure I'm on the right. Yeah, attachment 3 is the flow chart that Mr. DeLizer had mentioned that the committee had reviewed and provided input on at its last meeting. And it was, again, just recently developed, and the flow chart illustrates how licensees using the AICPA's recently implemented system called PRIMA upload peer review information, schedule peer review, the acceptance of the peer review process, final peer review ratings, and any corrective or implementation plans when they're appropriate. There are only two types of peer reviews: a system review, which focuses on licensees to perform audits and test the firm's system of quality control to ensure that the system was designed in accordance with professional standards and complied with by the firm's personnel. And the second type of peer review is an engagement review, which is focused on firms that perform compilation and review engagements to assess whether engagements were performed in conformity with professional standards. And at the conclusion of the peer review process, one of three ratings is ascribed to a report. It's either pass with deficiencies, or substandard. The AICPA uses the term fail, but within our statutes and regulations, the term is substandard. On pages 3 and 4, I've highlighted what each rating means as it relates to either a system or engagement review. And accounting firms are required to report peer review information to the CBA at the time of license renewal using what's called the peer review reporting form, or more commonly referred to as the PR1, which is included with their license renewal application. However, if an accounting firm receives a substandard fail rating, they're required to submit to the CBA within 45 days of the acceptance of that report the peer review report, along with any materials documenting remedial or corrective actions that they've already completed. As part of the peer review program, the CBA maintains an active oversight process to ensure these CBA-approved peer review program providers meet the minimum standards outlined in the CBA regulations, and the advisory committee, which Mr. DeLizer chairs and is referred to as the PROC, provides recommendations to the CBA on any matter upon which it is authorized to act to ensure the effectiveness of mandatory peer review. And we've highlighted on page 5 the roles and responsibilities of that committee. So at this time, I'd like to turn discussions back over to this item to President Savoy, and I'd be happy to answer any questions members may have.
Thank you. Since no action is required on this particular item, are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, shall we move on to the next item, which, Mr. Francella?
Yep. So the next item is item 5C4, and it's discussion and possible action regarding the evaluation of the peer reviewer population. This has been a topic on the board's radar for about a year and a half now, since it was placed on the new responsibility to the PROC. And so for this item, the CBA is being asked to approve a draft letter to the AICPA and CalCPA presenting specific data points to include in developing an initial framework to monitor the peer reviewer population. The draft letter being proposed for approval is provided in attachment 1, while attachments 2 through 7 to this item are the previous letters that the CBA staff CBA had sent, and responses to those letters that were submitted to the board by the AICPA and CalCPA. And so at its most recent meeting in December, the PROC and staff reviewed the responses received from the AICPA and CalCPA and have determined that the responses received did not provide sufficient information to effectively assess the present state of the peer reviewer population in California. Some of the areas concerned, which are outlined on the bottom of page 2 and top of page 3 of your item, include the aging peer reviewer population and information on peer reviewers for specialized industries. And what this really could happen, or what the impact could be, is a decrease in California peer reviewer population can potentially impact on licensees' ability to renew their license, as it is a condition for license renewal. Given that it appears the AICPA, as the primary CBA-approved entity responsible for statistical information related to peer review program, does not presently have sufficient information from which to draw effective assessments regarding the peer reviewer population, especially in those areas related to must-select engagements, it seems prudent that the CBA establish what it believes is a minimum framework from which to work from. And so on the bottom of page 3, I've highlighted the suggested data points the PROC developed for the CBA consideration as part of developing an initial framework. And again, this would be information specific to California's population. The letter staff prepared to the AICPA and CalCPA, again, is in attachment 1 and is drafted in a way to initiate efforts to work collectively and collaboratively in developing a data collection and tracking model and framework for the peer reviewer population. I'd like to offer 2 edits to that letter. One is to update the date of the January meeting, which is on the first, I think in the first paragraph, reflecting that it's only January 18th, not 19th, and then more importantly, to reflect the signatory as President Savoy. We wrote this letter a long time ago, so I apologize for that.
I didn't even see that.
It went through several reviews. The PROC and staff recommend that CBA approve the letter for signature by President Savoy. And at this time, I would like to turn discussion on this item back over to the President. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Since we initially brought this up, have you seen a decline in the California peer review population?
Honestly, I can't say because we've never had any benchmark from where to work from. We never had some starting point. So when this first came up about, I want to say it was July 16 is when the board first started talking about this. That was kind of the jumping off point. And we've spent the past year primarily with the AICPA because they're the repository. While we address our letters to Cal CPA, AICPA is the one who's primarily giving us the data. And the data they provided is insufficient to even begin a real discussion on what the peer reviewer population looks like. Is this just at a system level, the audit system review level, which it potentially is it must select, is it an aging population, a whole host of things. And so I couldn't tell you. I know there's a lot of factors going on that's causing some issues that we receive on our end, and peer reviewer is primarily right now it's the new Prima application. Its rollout has not been as seamless as I think the AICPA had hoped, so there's a lot of issues going on with that. So we get a number of phone calls and delays that have been licensees experienced there. So I know it's long-winded, but I can't give you a specific answer because we'd have no benchmark from where to work from, and that's what this is designed to do going forward.
Any other comments, questions?
The reference to specialized industries, I mean, other than benefit plans and single audits, is there something else in there that you guys are thinking about?
No, I would honestly say the ERISA stuff is the primary one that I'm aware of because I've been hearing rumblings about individuals who did that. Those peer reviews are getting out of doing that because it's a high risk to the peer reviewer, not just to the peer review firm. And so there's a concern that maybe that population of people who were historically doing it stop doing it. But those are the only two that I'm aware of at this particular time.
Yes, Alicia.
I was going to move approval of the draft letter to AICPA and Cal CPA presenting the specific data points with the edits by Mr. Gonzalo.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Public comment? Call for a vote.
Kathleen Wright,
Yes?
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Michael Savoy.
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson,
Yes.
Sunny Young Sun Park,
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
George Pamela,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
and Alicia Burhouse.
Yes.
Motion passes, thank you. Next item, again, Mr. Fritz.
The last item under 5C5 is discussion of possible action regarding evaluation of the peer reviewer committee member qualifications criteria. And so for this item, the CBA is being asked to approve the proposed changes to the minimum qualifications within the PROC's procedure manual regarding appointment to the committee. The specific qualifications are outlined in attachment 1, and I believe on page, the bottom of page, middle of page 2 to the top of page 3. These original qualifications have been in place since 2008 when the board developed the initial policy issues associated with establishing mandatory peer review. And so they drew heavily from the AICPA standards related to being a team captain for system peer reviews. With the PRC now having 8+ years of experience performing oversight, individuals appointed to the PRC, it seems like it's more important they have a strong background in auditing functions and financial statements as a primary qualification. So in consultation with the PROC chair, staff are proposing that the two qualifications in the middle of page 3, specifically that an individual be currently active in the practice of public accountancy in the accounting and auditing function of a firm enrolled in the AICPA peer review program as a partner of the firm or as a manager or person with equivalent supervisory responsibilities, and be associated with a firm or all firms if associated with multiple firms that received a report with a peer review rating of pass from its most recent peer review, be removed from minimum qualifications and now be listed as desirable qualifications. This change will hopefully broaden the pool of candidates. Attachment 1 has the strike-through and underlined track change versions for the proposed modifications, and staff and the PRC would recommend the CBA approve those modifications. And at this time, I will turn it back over to President Savoy and answer any questions members may have.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? Public comment? Call for a vote.
Alicia Burhow.
Yes.
Jose Campos.
Yes.
George Familet.
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell-Hines.
Yes.
Dan Jacobson.
Yes.
Soshi Leon.
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez.
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson.
Yes.
Sunny Young Sun Park.
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson.
Yes.
Michael Savoy.
Yes.
Mark Silverman.
Yes.
And Kathleen Wright.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes. Don't go anywhere, Mr. Francelli. Thanks to the other two. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Can't get rid of you. Item 6, report of the enforcement chief.
Thank you. So item 6A is the enforcement activity report. For this meeting, this covers 5 months of data as of November 30th, 2017. So looking at pages 1 and 2 of the report, which covers complaint information, so far for fiscal year through November 30th, 2017, for fiscal year 17-18, the CBA has received 829 complaints. The percentage of external complaints received over prior fiscal years increased. I think we mentioned last time that this was due to some internal procedures on classification of complaints from what historically had been considered internal to now being considered external, specifically governmental agency complaints. The other thing is, while the numbers are slightly down from prior years, we are aware that the licensing division has approximately 200 or more referrals pending at this time coming over to us, so they just hadn't processed them yet, so I anticipate a pretty good size increase between the November report and what I present in March. Moving on to pages 3 through 5 regarding investigations. Of the 829 complaints received, the CBA has opened 816. We continue to see some positive trends in case management, whereby the division has closed more cases than has been assigned. The division has experienced an increase in the days, though, to close investigations as it continues to address the aged inventory in those cases over 24 months. On page 4, provides an inventory of the investigations pending based on the age of the case, or age of the cases. So, again, this speaks to some of the inventory control that I think is very positive for the enforcement division. Over 55% of the division's cases are less than 6 months in age, and taking it a step further, over 3/4 of the cases are less than a year. So we've really kind of cleared out that middle group and are now still attacking that 24-month and over. The CBA does have 72 cases over 24 months, but as members will note, this is a significant decrease of the inventory compared with the year end of 2016-17, where we were at 114, and even from the last report where we had 105. So we were able to reduce the inventory by another 40% over the last 2 months leading into this report. And I want to say when we ran the December numbers, we were around 60-something cases. So we're continuing to see a drop in that particular area. Moving on to pages 6 through 9 relating to discipline. So far, the CBA has referred 38 matters to the AG's office, which is a similar pace to last fiscal year. And at the bottom of pages 6 and 7, or bottom of page 6 and on to page 7, working closely with the AG's office, the inventory of matters pending there continues to decrease. At this same time last fiscal year, the CBA had 102 cases pending at the AG's office, while for this fiscal year we only have 79. There are 5 cases over 24 months. The one has been one in the court systems for a very long time, but 3 of the cases had decisions that took effect in December, so that number is now decreased down to just 2 cases. Provided on page 8 is information on final orders adopted by the board. Through November 2017, the CBA has taken action on 42 matters, but another 15 took effect in December, so this total really is closer to 57 at this time. And lastly, on page 9, regarding cost, through November 2017, the CBA had ordered costs in 23 cases in the amount of just over $203,000. This represents 63% of the approximate investigation and prosecution costs for those 23 investigations. As for citation and fine, which is on page 10, over the first 5 months, we've issued 62 citations, which is similar to last fiscal year's totals. The CBA did see a significant increase in the average days to issue citations from 149 to 222, but this spike was, as again, dealing with the aged inventory. We had 14 cases that drove that up. If we pulled those cases out, the average days to issue citation was only 128 days. Let's see, moving on to page 11, which deals with the FTB's Intercept, or Franchise Tax Board Intercept Program, and probation monitoring. At the top of page 11 are the monies we've referred to FTB, totaling $7,300, and we've collected $250 so far for this fiscal year. As for probation monitoring, first, I'd like to extend my appreciation to Mr. Campos for coming to the meeting, the EAC meeting, and sitting through probation orientation and seeing kind of, I guess, the sausage being made with the probation orientation process. But as for the monitoring, I would like to note there was a calculation error. We have 162 probationers, not 157. And this population has continued to experience steady growth over the last 3+ years. I took a look back because we don't provide historical data for this particular section. So I did go back and look at the beginning of fiscal year 15-16. The CBA had 95 probationers. Fast forward to today, we have 162, so we've seen about a 70% increase in the number of probationers in this area. However, even with this significant increase, the division has actually continued to increase its own monitoring efforts to ensure compliance and aid in successful completion. And 2 areas where we've really bumped up some of our activities are practice investigations, getting out there and going to see the CPAs, and requesting review of work samples and having those come before the EAC for evaluation and whether or not we need to open another case against those individuals. Lastly, on page 12.
Question on that page.
Yeah.
What does the last item mean? Total probation orientations completed? Does that mean that 27 out of the 160 some folks have been through an orientation, or?
That's just 27 we've completed during the 5 months this fiscal year. So the 162 is an ongoing population. So of the 57 or so that have, you've taken discipline on, whatever subset of that actually have probation, we've conducted orientations as quickly as we could. So we've done 27, and I think we have another set of them set to occur next month, I believe. But all 162, hopefully at this point, or close to all 162 have gone through a probation orientation. It's one of the things
That's really the question, kind of is there, some subset of that we haven't really gotten to,
Well,
and that there could be?
We'll find out for you who might not have gone through one. We're looking to expand this particular section as well to talk about some of the violations we see, because one of the things I anticipate this board will be dealing with a bit more now, because it's such an active area for us, is petitions to revoke probation, where I anticipate that number of, and the AG referrals is going to be higher than 2 or 6. It might be close to 10 by the end of this fiscal year, because we're really active in that particular area. So as it relates to the last page, and moving on to mobility and division highlights, the mobility program requires us to do a review of the SEC and PCOB websites every 6 months. We performed that this month, so it wasn't in this particular data. It'll be in your next report. As for highlights, we recently had another ICPA, or an investigative CPA, retire. So we now have 2 full-time permanent ICPA vacancies. We have received a handful of applications, and hope to do some interviews for those vacant positions within the next month or two. And at this time, I'd like to turn discussion back over to President Savoy, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much. Any questions, discussions? Mr. Campos first.
One more, the 200 or so potentially coming over from licensing in terms of referrals, is that renewals, initial, or all over the place?
It'll all be, well, I won't say it all. For that 200, yes, it'll all be renewals, and it could be anything from certain CE violations, failing to respond to renewals on some inquiries, or it could be peer review related discrepancies where they say, I'm subject to A&A, but I'm not subject to peer review and those types of things.
Okay.
Ms. Wright.
2 quick questions. On page 9, would I be correct in order to determine the percentage of write-off of costs in taking 323 minus 203 and dividing that number by 323, would that be correct? Normally, the accounts receivable collection activity is expressed as a percentage of write-offs.
No, I wouldn't say that is accurate because, well, if I understand the question, no, because they still may not be due at that particular time. They have up to about, I think they have about 2.5 years to pay much of this cost. So while there was a 395 ordered in 16, 17, they still, so maybe I'm missing where you're.
Okay, maybe we could talk about it separately,
Okay.
so I don't go into the whole thing here, but maybe I can catch up with you right after the meeting. So that's one thing. The second thing is just as a general statement, as you're all well aware, we've had a huge tax bill passed, which is effective in 2018 with lots of unanswered questions. The board might want to consider with respect to budget considerations and whatnot that I think there may be a lot of, there may be returns filed where disclosure is appropriate, but there is no disclosure. And on the return of a position taken with respect to one of several provisions of the law which have changed, and what that does to malpractice issues related to the year 2018 remains to be seen.
Yeah, I mean, we can take that at a future meeting as an agenda item. However, you're not going to see the results of that till sometime in early 2019. So we can push it off, but,
Yeah,
you know, until there's regulations and rules and everything else on it.
I know.
We don't know, but that's good for a future meeting as an agenda topic. Any further discussion, comments? Thank you so much. Yes, I'm sorry.
President Savoy, with your approval, I'd like to ask Dominic, I was sort of remiss in my staffing update, but it's a nice opportunity when the board members are here in the office. He has several members of the enforcement team. They've done a dynamite job these last couple of years in really making some improvements. So I was hoping he could introduce or have them self-introduce to the members.
Please, bring it on.
So with me today, I think you've met Ben Simcox. He's the Deputy Chief of Enforcement. Melissa Winchell, she's presently working as a manager within the Enforcement Division. Ashley Hebner, who oversees our AG and citation desk, and everybody knows Paul, one of the supervising investigative CPAs.
Well, thank you for the amazing work you guys are doing. Thank you. That's why our pink sheets are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Good job. Thank you so much. Next report from our licensing chief, Gina Sanchez. You have 5 minutes, get back.
Good afternoon, everyone. This licensing activity report reflects statistics through November 2017. Beginning with page 1, of course, this reflects our total CBA population, which is now up to 104,065 licensees. I don't know why that zero threw me off today. And registrants. Page 2 reflects the amount of contact our staff have with our CBA stakeholders, beginning with telephone calls and emails received. The bottom chart on this page reflects requests from stakeholders for, bless you, for certification of CBA records relating to license status or CPA exam scores, and the unit is currently processing these requests within 23 days of receipt. Moving on to page 3, begins the statistics related to the CPA exam. In the first 5 months of this fiscal year, we have approved 2,891 first-time candidates and 6,556 repeat candidates. On average, the exam staff review about 578 first-time applications per month, 1,300 repeat applications per month, and over 1,500 transcripts per month as a monthly workload. You'll see a new line that has a little star by it called Total Deficient under First-Time Sitter. There are currently 443 applications that the CBA has deemed deficient, and staff are waiting additional information from the applicant before we can complete the process. We consider these applications incomplete, and the time frame is considered outside board control. Applicants have 1 year from their identified deficiency to complete their application. This means they will have to reapply, new application, new fee. However, the CBA does retain their transcripts and any additional documents in the file. So they do not have to resubmit those. Moving on to page 4, identifies applicant extension request to extend a notice to schedule or to extend an exam score for a selection that's about to expire. Additionally, statistics are captured for the number of individuals who requested and who were approved for special accommodations to take the exam. Moving on to page 5, begins the statistics for initial licensure. In the first 5 months of this fiscal year, we have approved 1,092 applicants for licensure, of which 277 have been given the authority to sign attest engagements. On average, the initial licensing staff review about 262 applications per month. Currently, there are 1,106 applications that the CBA has deemed deficient, and staff are awaiting additional information from the applicant before they can complete the process. Incomplete applications remain deficient on average in the initial licensure unit 161 days. However, applicants have 1 year from the identified deficiency to complete their application. This means they will, if they exceed that, they will have to reapply and re-fingerprint. However, the CBA does still retain their transcripts, their experience forms, and any other documents they have in their file. Okay, page 6 breaks down, as I mentioned just previously, breaks down the number of licensees approved with general authority versus the attest authority. Page 7 identifies that 80 California accountancy firms have been approved for licensure so far this year, and 20 out-of-state firms have been approved for registration. Beginning on page 8, moves on to the renewal-related statistics. The first chart reflects the total number of licenses renewed so far this fiscal year, and the second chart identifies the number of those renewals that have been reviewed by staff. Currently, out of over 17,000 renewal applications reviewed by staff, about 3,000 have been identified with some type of deficiency. Again, the renewals unit works diligently with each one of these licensees to ensure compliance in a timely manner. Page 9 identifies our retired applicants and our division highlights. Since the development of this report, I have selected Kenitra Simmons as the renewal manager to backfill Cindy Fuller. Kenitra has been with the CBA since 2015, working in the enforcement division. She has been successfully monitoring licensees on probation, most recently working under Carrie O'Connor. With her wealth of knowledge and insight of the CBA, I'm confident she'll be very successful in her new role. So my team has now been refilled, at least at the manager level, with Suzanne Gracia, Kenitra, and myself. So we are working hard to get our flow and relationships established with each other and staff, and it's so far been working great. This concludes my report. I will now turn it back over to the president for any questions.
Are there any questions? Yes.
Very quick, the CPA exam score release timeline is changing as I read this, but then it goes back in 2019 or something like that.
Yes, so the CPA exam is implementing the Excel. I think we've discussed this and it was been a while, but they are making slight changes. They're incorporating an Excel part of the exam. And so let me get to that section so I can speak to it
Page,
specifically.
last page, I think.
Last page, thank you very much. Okay, so the score release timeline has been released. It is available on the website, on the Naspa website. And the examination scores will now be released at the end of each window. So typically, we get exam scores, it's called a rolling score release, where throughout the window, we will get a dump of scores 2 to 3 times a window. However, due to the upgrades that have been going on recently for this year, this calendar year, the 4 quarters will be released at the end of each window. So we have made changes to our IT and so on to incorporate and to be able to handle that volume at one time, not only receiving the scores, but also the applicants logging in and checking the scores. The last score release went off without a hitch. There were no problems, and there were over 8,000 released in one day. So it went off perfectly. So rolling score release dates will return for the first quarter in 2019. Well, they'll be a little bit more sporadic. We are sensitive to applicants who are might be losing a score as they're repeating through their sections. So we're taking each request for exam extensions, score extensions on a case-by-case basis.
All right, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, so on page 8 then is, you've got the different pieces and just trying to understand the potential items that will result in, I guess, additional enforcement referrals. I assume what Mr. Franzella talked about excludes these 379 that have already been referred over, year to date. And so that means then from these responses up above, these categories up above, is that where some of those may result in those additional?
Yes, out of those 3,062 deficiencies identified, if licensees are, like you said, non-responsive, or we find another CE deficiency and they're still not completing, we do give them ample time. We work with them, we give them time frames and so on prior to referring to enforcement. But really, the top enforcement referrals would be, in relation to either peer review or CE deficiency.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for your report. Appreciate it. With that, before we go into the committee reports, let's take a 5-minute break.
Yay.
5 minutes? Oh, come on down. Perfect timing.
Oh, look who's here.
There's nothing free, but it is available. Back on the record, I'd like to welcome Ms. Katrina Salazar to our meeting. Okay. We'll continue with item 8A, Report of the Legislative Committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. So a quick update on our discussion this morning on the Legislative Committee. Before I provide the discussion on items 883 and item 885, just want to make sure that that the team knows that we have 2 attachments as reference documents. A2, which was the overview of the California legislative and regulatory process and the legislative committee's role, and item 8A4, which was the California Board of Accountancy 2017-18 legislative tracking chart. Now, going into the item numbers where there was some discussion, I'll start with item 8A3. The review and consideration of a possible position on Senate Bill 795, accountancy practice privileges. We had some great discussion, and at a high level, the discussion, a brief summary is that the staff stated that the purpose of this agenda item was for the CBA to consider and take a possible position on Senate Bill 795, which would extend the current January 1st, 2019 repeal date for the CBA's no notice, no fee mobility program by 1 year. Currently, the CBA's mobility program is scheduled to sunset at the end of 2018. Staff provided a brief overview of the background of the bill, the current version of the bill, and staff recommendations. When introduced in February of 2017, SB 795 removed the sunset dates on the CBA's current mobility program, making it permanent. At its March 2017 meeting, the CBA took a watch position on this bill. Staff reported that following the CBA's March meeting, staff worked with the sponsors of the bill to draft amendments that would address drafting errors in the bill's language. In addition, staff from the Senate Business Professions and Economic Development Committee, or Senate BMP, informed CBA staff of their preference to wait for the CBA to complete its report on the mobility program before considering SB 75. Earlier this month, 2 weeks ago, a week ago, on January 8th, the Senate BMP committee considered SB 75. During the hearing, the committee noted that it wished to have a little bit more time to review the CBA's report before approving the bill to make the program permanent. Therefore, the committee approved the bill, but amended it only to extend the mobility program by 1 year. The author and sponsors, which are today here with us of the bill, stated their desire to make the program permanent, provided that the Senate BMP committee staff are comfortable with the findings of the CBA's mobility report. So as such, the discussion this morning was to recommend the CBA to take support if amended with an amended position. So the legislative committee recommends that the CBA take a supportive amended position on Senate Bill 795 and direct staff to request the following amendment in the position letter, which are 2 key points. The first one being on page 22, line 20, to remove the operative data language in Business and Professions Code section 5096.8, and number 2, remove the sunset dates to make the program permanent. Any questions or anything else that we need to?
So that comes forth as a motion and a second. So at this point, any discussion, any questions?
Looks like, is the author amenable to these amendments that we want to put forward?
Chase?
I think the sentiment from the discussion was yes, but we have Mr. Fox here to provide some.
Jason Fox with Cal CPA. Yes, and in the Senate BMP hearing, that was the author's intent. I think the 1-year extension was just to allow everybody a little bit extra time to review the report and for the board to weigh in officially. So.
What was the sense on the timeline of a little more time?
I think it was for this board to officially look at the program and weigh in and to allow for a little bit extra time. I think the expectation is, as the bill moves through the legislative process this year, to make those amendments, most likely probably in the Assembly Business and Professions Committee once they've had a chance to look at it and feel comfortable with the report.
And where's it going to go after this if it is accepted? Would it go right to appropriations, or?
Go ahead, Blair.
It is poised to move out of the Senate, off the Senate floor, possibly today or within the next couple of weeks. It was a 2-year bill. I'm sorry, Pilar and Yati Quintana for the National Accounting Firms. It was a 2-year bill, so it had to be on that first fast track for the first year. So now it'll be in the Assembly. So there will be some more time now that we've met that quick beginning of the year deadline for the scrutiny and consideration for that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other comments? Ms. Reed?
Alicia Burhow?
Yes.
I think Mr. Fox had some.
I'm sorry, he was about to say something.
No, not the moment.
I was just going to say, thank you to the board and the board staff and the MSG, with Ms. Salazar and Mr. Campos taking the lead. I know there's a lot of work, and the board staff did a lot of work to put together this report, and I know it's been a long process, so I just want to thank you for all of the work. This is coming to an end here, hopefully.
Thank you. Okay, we'll try that again.
Alicia Burhow?
Yes.
Jose Campos?
Yes.
George Famila?
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines?
Yes.
Dan Jacobson?
Yes.
Soshi Leon?
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez?
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson?
Yes.
Sunny Youngsun Park?
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson?
Yes.
Michael Savoy?
Yes,
Mark Silverman?
Yes.
And Kathleen Wright?
Yes.
motion carries. Yes.
Did you vote?
Ms. Salazar.
I'm sorry.
please.
I'm present.
Katrina Salazar?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Motion carries unanimously.
Is she present?
Moving on
Is
to item
here.
8A5, which is an update on previously approved legislative proposals deleting outdated language for attest service requirements, certified copies of records of the disciplinary or other actions taken against licensee as conclusive evidence for purpose of determining discipline, and updating terminology regarding application forms. So staff indicated that this item was just an update on previously approved legislative proposals and no action was needed. Staff reported that every year, the Senate Business, Professions, and Economic Development Committee requests that all DCA boards submit legislative proposals for possible inclusion in its annual omnibus bill. Staff reported that the Senate Business, Professions, and Economic Development Committee will inform CBA staff whether the CBA's proposal will be included in the omnibus bill. No specific timeframe was discussed. The Legislative Committee did not take action on this item. Agenda items 2 and 4 were written, that's it. So that's the update for item 8A5. Any questions? Okay, and then lastly, for agenda item 8A6, there was no items that were discussed for a future meeting. That wraps up my.
Thank you so much for your report. Yep, now for the report from the Committee on Professional Conduct, Ms. Robinson.
Thank you, President Savoy. Today, or earlier today, the Committee for Professional Conduct met, and there was discussion regarding the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy release of the final version of the Model Rules for Continuing Professional Education, Article 3, and possible changes to Title 16, California Code of Regulations, Sections 80 to 94, Continuing Education Rules. The purpose of this agenda item was to provide the CBA the opportunity to discuss the final version of NASBA's Model Rules for Continuing Professional Education. Staff presented an overview of relevant changes made to 4 sections of the NASBA rules. 1 was technical fields of study, 2, non-technical fields of study, 3, continuing education requirements for new or renewal licensees, and 4, continuing professional education records. Staff stated if the CBA wishes to implement or modify any of the rules, to direct staff on each proposed rule for the initiation of the rulemaking process and bring back at another time. Staff indicated that the first section, technical fields of study, identified subject areas that contribute to the competence of a CPA that directly relates to the CPA's field of business. The new areas that are presently not listed in the CBA regulations are business law, economics, management services, and statistics. The committee discussed whether it supports further defining ethics into 2 categories: regulatory ethics, considered technical, and behavioral ethics, considered non-technical. The CPC recommends that the CBA direct staff to prepare regulatory language that incorporates business law, economics, management services, and statistics of the technical fields of study. Additionally, the CPC recommends that the CBA direct staff to bring back additional research regarding ethics as it relates to what is presently accepted and how the proposal would impact the regulations. The second section, non-technical fields of study, identifies subject areas that contribute to the competence of a CPA in areas that indirectly relate to the CPA's field of business. Staff stated that the NASBA rules identify additional areas that are not presently listed in CBA regulations, including behavioral ethics, personal development, and production. The committee discussed this section and decided to take no action. The third section, related to continuing education requirements for renewal, has been expanded to include the new licensees must complete at least 40 hours of continuing education during the first full annual period following the year in which the license was obtained. In comparison, CBA regulations requires a new licensee to complete a minimum of 20 hours of continuing education at renewal for each full 6-month period from the date the initial license was issued. The committee discussed this section and decided to take no action. The last section related to continuing education records specifies that the maximum credit allowed for technical review of CE programs and writing publication articles, books, and other publications cannot exceed 50% of the total continuing education hours required in a renewal period. In comparison, CBA regulations state that the maximum credit allowed shall not exceed 25% of the total continuing education hours required in a renewal period. The CPC recommends that the CBA direct staff to prepare regulatory language that states the maximum credit allowed for CE records, which includes, technical review of CE programs and writing published articles shall not exceed 50% of the total CE hours required in a renewal period. The CPC discussed the current CBA regulations in light of NASPA's model rules for continuing education and asked staff to bring back the reason for NASPA's change in the rules. And that concludes President and members.
Okay, so we have 4 items, 2 of which no action, 2 require action. So getting back to the first one first, regarding the motion that's duly made and second.
Yes.
Just repeat your recommendation on that first item.
Right here. The CPC recommends that the CBA direct staff to prepare regulatory language that incorporates business law, economics, management services, and statistics of the technical fields of study. Additionally, the CPC recommends that CBA direct staff to bring back additional research regarding ethics as it relates to what is presently accepted and how the proposal would impact the regulations.
Thank you. First and second's already been made. Any further discussion? Mr. Jacobs.
Very briefly, in the committee, I mentioned, and I'll mention again, that I just didn't see a need for this, in that the licensees might just say, oh God, now I've got another thing that I've got to adjust to, rather than, and that seemed to outweigh any potential need, and I didn't see it.
Thank you. Ms. Wright?
One comment that did not come out in the committee discussion earlier is that inclusion of these additional fields of study as acceptable technical subject matter would help students who are CPAs and continuing with a degree program where generally they're required to take various business topics outside of their professional field of study, and then they could count that.
So this is now inclusive
Of those.
within that field of study. Ms. Salazar?
This is more of a procedural question. Can you give some input on whether or not, when the additional research comes back, if there is a recommendation to make change regarding the ethics piece, and that comes before the board, will we be able to consolidate the regulatory language rather than pursuing multiple tracks?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any further discussion, comment, public comment? Call for a vote, Ms. Reed.
Kathleen Wright,
Yes?
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Michael Savoy.
Yes.
Katrina Salazar.
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson,
Yes.
Sunny Youngsun Park,
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
No.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
George Familet,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
and Alicia Burhow.
Yes.
Motion passes. Can you please read number 4, which is your motion and second regarding that item?
The CPC recommends that the CBA direct staff to prepare regulatory language that states the maximum credit allowed for CE records, which includes technical review of CE programs and writing published articles, and shall not exceed 50% of the total CE hours required in a renewal period.
Any discussion? Yes, Ms. Wright.
With that proposed regulatory language, could I ask CBA staff to include direction on how to count hours for this purpose? In other words, if I write a lot of articles, and I'm always concerned about whether or not I'm allowed to count every single hour I spend on research towards CE, or is it 2 hours of research for 1 hour of CE? What should the guidance, or what should be the rule regarding?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's guidance, but you want to make it clearer.
Well, actually, I don't know what the guidance is, and I've looked because
Okay.
I
we'll
get
bring
asked
that.
that question.
Well, we can bring that forth.
Okay.
Do you have a comment, Alicia?
No, I do not.
Any public comment? Call for a vote.
Alicia Burhow,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
George Fairmoulet,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
No.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
No.
Corolla Nicholson,
No.
Sunny Youngsun Park,
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
and Kathleen Wright.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, motion passes. Next item on the agenda, excuse me, is item 9 for the approval of minutes. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes, specifically agenda items 9A through D?
I move approval of minutes at items 9A, B, C, and D.
Thank you.
Second.
Any discussion? Any public comment? Call for a vote.
Kathleen Wright,
Yes.
Mark Silverman,
Yes.
Michael Savoy.
Yes.
Katrina Salazar.
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson,
Yes.
Sunny Youngsun Park,
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
George Famelet,
Yes.
Jose Campos.
Yes.
And Alicia Burhow.
Yes.
Motion passes, thank you. Item 10, other business. Do we have anything on the AICPA? No. Report on Naspa. First, item 1, on any report on any meetings? No? Okay. Number 2, Ms. Reed?
Okay, the purpose of this agenda item is to provide the CBA with staff responses to the NASPA focus questions, which were submitted to NASPA on December 18th, 2017. The responses assist the NASPA regional directors with staying apprised of each state's policies and procedures and to see where improvements or adjustments might be made. No action is required on this agenda item unless the CBA would like additional information provided to NASPA on the questions. And at this time, I would like to turn it back over to President Savoy and would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any comments, questions? Thank you very much. Yes, sure.
Item 1C, is that pertaining to the credit we talked about in terms of CE for participating on advisory committees? And I could see why we chose neither, but I think the only clarifier is we debated that and decided not to do anything with it, right? That'd probably be the only clarification I would provide, that it's not one of their responses.
I don't know.
However, we want to bring it up further down the road for, we felt, better participation, better attendance, not at this level, but at the committee levels, because they're doing things that possibly could qualify. So we talked about that at length, so I don't want to beat it up, but okay. Okay, so no report. Katrina, did you have a report on the Strategic Planning Task Force of NASPA?
I
You
do
weren't
not.
here when we came through it.
I do not have a report on Strategic Planning Task Force, and the Enforcement Resources Committee, if you'll indulge me, has been deferred and will be held on January 24th, so I will provide a report next meeting.
Other business, I did get word that you were unanimously elected to represent the Pacific region of NASPA. came early this morning, so you weren't here, so we saved it for you.
That's fine.
Okay. Closing business. Public comments. In order to allow the CBA sufficient time to conduct its scheduled business, public comment will be limited to 5 minutes. Please make your comments focused and relevant to the duties of the CBA. It is not necessary to repeat statements or views of a previous speaker. It is sufficient to state that you agree. Written statements should be summarized and submitted to the CBA. They should not be read. The board values input from the public as part of its consumer protection mission. It invites and welcomes public comment during this section of the agenda. However, board members cannot engage in dialogue with those who testify during this section of the agenda due to constraints imposed on the CBA and its members by law. The law prohibits the CBA from substantively discussing or voting on any matter brought up during public comment. A member of the public who would like the CBA to discuss a general topic not related to the specific case involving one of its licensees can ask the board to consider placing this issue on a future board agenda. If you have any application or disciplinary charges pending before the CBA, we ask that you do not discuss the details of your case or pending complaint, since the board members will be the judges and by law are not permitted to receive evidence or information that is not part of the administrative record. At this time, is there any public comment? Good. Do we have any agenda items for future meetings that you want to bring up? Okay, with that, this meeting is adjourned and we're going to go into closed session.